The rejection rang through the clearing like a death sentence, leaving her humiliated before the entire pack during the ceremony meant to be the most beautiful night of her life. 3 days later, the most powerful man in the supernatural territories knocked on her door, speaking of prophetic visions and ancient destinies. But why would a supreme alpha travel 3 days to meet an omega who had been publicly rejected? Serena's heart shattered the moment Damien's voice cut through the sacred ceremony like a blade through silk. "I reject you, Serena Blackwood, as my destined mate." The words echoed across the moonlit clearing, where their entire pack had gathered to witness what should have been the most beautiful night of her life. Instead, it became the moment that would define her greatest humiliation and, unknowingly, her most extraordinary transformation. The autumn air carried the scent of burning sage and cedar, traditional herbs that blessed the monthly bonding ceremony under the full moon. Dozens of werewolves stood in concentric circles around the ancient stone altar, their eyes reflecting the flickering torchlight as they watched their future alpha publicly destroy the woman they had all expected him to claim. Serena stood frozen in the center, her simple white ceremonial dress suddenly feeling like a costume for a role she was never meant to play. Damien's rejection wasn't just a personal devastation, it was a public execution of her dreams, her hopes, and everything she had believed about her place in the Silverwood Pack. The silence that followed his declaration was deafening, broken only by the crackling of the ceremonial fire and the whispered gasps of shock from the assembled pack members. Serena felt the weight of every stare, every pitying glance, every barely concealed look of satisfaction from those who had never believed she was worthy of their future alpha. Her legs trembled as the reality crashed over her like a freezing wave. She had prepared for this night for months, believing with every fiber of her being that she and Damien were destined to be together. They had grown up side by side, trained together, shared countless quiet moments in the forest where he had whispered promises of forever. But now, standing before their pack, he looked at her as if she were a stranger. Worse, as if she were nothing at all. The rejection ritual required her response, and tradition demanded she accept it with dignity. Serena's voice barely rose above a whisper as she forced out the required words, "I accept your rejection, Damien Silverwood." Each syllable tasted like ash in her mouth, and she felt something fundamental break inside her chest, not just her heart, but her very sense of self. As the pack began to disperse in uncomfortable silence, Serena caught fragments of whispered conversations that cut deeper than Damien's rejection itself. "I always knew she wasn't strong enough for an alpha. Look at her, so weak, so ordinary. The pack deserves better than a nobody from the outskirts." Each word was a dagger, confirming every insecurity she had ever harbored about herself. Serena stumbled away from the ceremony grounds, her vision blurred by tears she refused to let fall in front of everyone. She had always known she was different from the other pack members. Her humble origins as the daughter of the pack's seamstress had never been forgotten or forgiven by those who believed leadership should remain within the bloodlines of the elite. But Damien had made her believe that love could transcend social boundaries, that their bond was stronger than pack politics. The path to her small cottage on the outskirts of Silverwood territory had never felt longer. Each step took her further from the life she had imagined and deeper into an uncertain future that terrified her. The familiar scents of her mother's herb garden and the warm glow of candlelight through the windows usually brought comfort. But tonight, they only emphasized how far she had fallen from the grand future she had envisioned as the alpha's mate. Inside the modest two-room cottage she shared with her mother, Elena, the silence was suffocating. Elena Blackwood looked up from her sewing with eyes full of sympathy and rage. Sympathy for her daughter's pain and rage at the injustice of it all. "My darling," she whispered, setting aside her work to embrace Serena. "I'm so sorry." Serena collapsed into her mother's arms, finally allowing the tears to fall. How could I have been so wrong, Mama? I felt it, the bond, the connection. I was so certain. Her voice broke on the last word, and she sobbed against her mother's shoulder like a child awakening from a nightmare. You weren't wrong about what you felt, Elena said softly, stroking her daughter's long auburn hair. But sometimes the heart sees what it hopes to see, not what truly is. She held Serena at arm's length, studying her face with those wise green eyes that seemed to hold secrets. This isn't the end of your story, sweetheart. Sometimes the most beautiful chapters begin with the most painful endings. But Serena couldn't see past her humiliation. For 3 days, she barely left her room, surviving on the herbal teas her mother forced upon her and the occasional slice of bread that tasted like cardboard in her mouth. The rejection had severed more than just her connection to Damien. It had cut her off from the pack's social structure entirely. Former friends avoided her cottage, unwilling to associate with someone who had been so publicly cast aside. On the 4th morning, as Serena sat by her bedroom window watching the sunrise paint the forest in shades of gold and amber, an impossible sound reached her ears. The deep, resonant howl of an alpha, not just any alpha, but the most powerful one in their realm. Magnus Thornfield, supreme alpha of the Northern Territories, was approaching Silverwood Pack lands. The howl sent shivers down Serena's spine that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with recognition of raw, untamed power. Magnus was a legend among their kind, a leader who ruled not just one pack, but an entire confederation of werewolf communities across the northern wilderness. Stories of his strength, his wisdom, and his fierce protection of his people had reached every corner of their world. He was also notoriously reclusive, rarely involving himself in the affairs of individual packs, unless something of great importance was at stake. Elena burst into Serena's room without knocking, her face pale with excitement and worry. "Serena, you need to dress, quickly. Magnus Thornfield is here, and he's asking to speak with you specifically." The words hung in the air like an impossible riddle. Why would the Supreme Alpha want anything to do with a rejected Omega who had just been publicly humiliated? Serena's hands shook as she pulled on her simplest dress, a soft blue cotton that her mother had made for her last birthday. She caught sight of herself in the mirror and winced at what she saw: pale skin, red-rimmed eyes, and an expression of defeated resignation that made her look far older than her 22 years. This was not how anyone should meet a Supreme Alpha, but she had no choice. The knock on their front door came precisely at noon, echoing through the small cottage like thunder. Elena opened it to reveal a figure that commanded attention without effort. Magnus Thornfield stood framed in their doorway like a force of nature barely contained in human form. He was tall, broader than any man Serena had ever seen, with dark hair that showed threads of silver at the temples, and eyes the color of storm clouds that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "Supreme Alpha," Elena said, dropping into a respectful bow. "You honor our humble home." Magnus stepped inside, and immediately the cottage felt smaller, charged with an energy that made the air itself seem to vibrate. His gaze found Serena, who stood frozen halfway down the narrow staircase, and when their eyes met, something electric passed between them. Something that made her forget, for just a moment, that she was supposed to be heartbroken. "Serena Blackwood," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate in her chest. "We need to talk." The formal "we" wasn't lost on her, and neither was the way he said her name, not with pity or condescension, but with something that sounded almost like respect. It was impossible, but there it was. Supreme Alpha Magnus Thornfield, the most powerful werewolf in their realm, was looking at her as if she mattered. "Supreme Alpha," she managed, attempting a curtsy that felt clumsy and inadequate. "I don't understand why you would want to speak with me. I'm nobody special, just a rejected Omega with nothing to offer." Something flashed in Magnus's eyes, anger perhaps, but not directed at her. That's where you're wrong, Serena. You're not nobody. And what happened at that ceremony 3 nights ago wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. He moved closer and she caught his scent. Pine forests and mountain snow, wild and clean and utterly masculine. I've traveled 300 miles to speak with you because I believe you're exactly who I've been searching for. The words made no sense, but the conviction in his voice was undeniable. Serena felt her mother's hand on her shoulder, offering silent support as she struggled to process what she was hearing. Searching for? I don't understand. Magnus smiled then, and it transformed his stern features entirely. 25 years ago, I received a vision from the moon goddess herself, a prophecy about a young woman who would rise from rejection to become something extraordinary. A woman with auburn hair and green eyes, whose heart would prove stronger than any alpha's pride. His gaze never left her face as he spoke. A woman who would help heal the rifts that are tearing our kind apart. The silence that followed was profound. Serena felt the world tilting around her. Everything she thought she knew about her life and her future suddenly cast into doubt. You think I'm this woman from your vision? I don't think, Magnus replied. I know. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small, intricately carved wooden box. This belonged to my grandmother, the previous oracle of our people. She left it to me with instructions that I would know when to give it away. He held the box out to Serena. It's been waiting for you. With trembling fingers, Serena took the box. The moment her skin touched the ancient wood, warmth spread up her arms, and she gasped as images flashed through her mind, visions of herself standing before crowds of werewolves, her voice carrying authority she had never possessed, her presence commanding respect she had never earned. In the visions, she wasn't the broken, rejected woman she saw in the mirror. She was powerful, confident, beloved. I know this is overwhelming, Magnus said softly, his voice gentler now. I know you're hurting from what Damien did to you, but Serena, what if his rejection wasn't your failure? What if it was the first step toward your true destiny? Elena squeezed her daughter's shoulder encouragingly, and Serena realized her mother wasn't surprised by any of this. Mama, she whispered, did you know? Elena's eyes filled with tears. I suspected, darling. Your father wasn't just any werewolf. He was connected to the ancient bloodlines, the oracle families. I thought hoped maybe. She trailed off, looking at Magnus with something like gratitude. Your father was my grandmother's nephew, Magnus said gently, which makes you her great-grandniece and one of the last living descendants of the oracle bloodline. The vision wasn't just about any woman, Serena. It was specifically about you. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Everything she had believed about her identity, her worth, her place in the world, was built on incomplete information. She wasn't just a seamstress's daughter. She was connected to the most ancient and revered bloodlines in their history. But I don't feel powerful, she whispered, her voice breaking. I feel broken and worthless, and you feel exactly how someone should feel who's about to undergo a profound transformation, Magnus interrupted. The moon goddess doesn't choose the already powerful, Serena. She chooses those who have the capacity to grow into power, those who understand humility and pain, and can use that understanding to help others. He stepped closer, and she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see the sincerity in those storm-gray eyes. I'm not asking you to believe in yourself yet. I know that will take time. I'm asking you to trust me, to come with me to the Northern Territories, where you can learn about your heritage and discover who you're truly meant to be. The offer hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and terror in equal measure. Leave everything she had ever known, travel to the mysterious Northern Territories with a man she had just met, based on the promise of a vision and a bloodline she had never known existed? It sounded like madness. But as Serena looked into Magnus's eyes, She felt something she hadn't experienced since before the rejection ceremony: hope. Not the naive hope of a young woman dreaming of romance, but the deeper hope of someone who had been offered a chance at redemption, at becoming more than she had ever imagined possible. "What exactly would I be training for?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Magnus smiled again, and this time it held a hint of pride. "To become what you were always meant to be, Serena Blackwood. To become an oracle, a bridge between the human and supernatural worlds, and if the moon goddess wills it, my partner in leading our people into a new age." His eyes darkened with intensity. "But first, you need to heal from what was done to you here, and you need to discover the power that's been sleeping inside you all along." The wooden box in her hands grew warmer, and Serena felt something stirring deep in her chest. Not the broken, aching void that Damien's rejection had left behind, but something new and unfamiliar, something that felt almost like strength. But what happened next would challenge everything she thought she knew about destiny, power, and the true meaning of the moon goddess's plans. The journey to the Northern Territories took 3 days through landscapes that seemed carved from dreams and nightmares alike. Serena rode beside Magnus in comfortable silence, her mind reeling from the enormity of what she had agreed to. Behind them, the familiar forests of Silverwood grew smaller with each mile, until they disappeared entirely behind mountain peaks that clawed at the sky like ancient fingers. The Northern Territories were unlike anything Serena had ever imagined. Vast wilderness stretched as far as the eye could see, broken only by crystal-clear rivers that sang over smooth stones, and forests so ancient they seemed to hold the memories of the world itself. The air here was different, thinner, charged with an energy that made her skin tingle and her heart race. It was as if the very earth beneath them pulsed with supernatural power. "This is Thornfield Keep," Magnus said, as they crested a hill, and the most magnificent structure Serena had ever seen came into view. The fortress rose from a plateau like something out of a fairy tale, its dark stone walls seeming to grow organically from the mountain itself. Towers spiraled toward the clouds, their windows glowing warmly in the gathering dusk, and ancient trees pressed close to the walls as if the forest itself sought shelter there. As they approached the massive gates, Serena felt hundreds of eyes upon her. Werewolves emerged from doorways and windows, their faces curious but respectful as they watched their supreme alpha return with an unknown woman. These weren't the suspicious, judgmental gazes she was accustomed to in Silverwood. These were the looks of people who trusted their leader's judgment absolutely. "Welcome home," Magnus murmured, and something in the way he said it made Serena's chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't name. The woman who met them in the great courtyard was perhaps the most beautiful creature Serena had ever encountered. Tall and graceful, with silver hair that seemed to capture moonlight and eyes the color of winter ice, she moved with the fluid confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. "Supreme Alpha," she said, bowing deeply to Magnus before turning those piercing eyes to Serena. "And you must be the Oracle's descendant we've heard so much about. I am Lydia Frostborn, High Counselor of the Northern Territories." Her smile was warm but calculating, and Serena felt immediately that this woman was evaluating her for purposes she couldn't yet understand. "Lydia has been my advisor for 15 years, Magnus explained, as they walked through corridors lined with ancient tapestries and weapons that sang with old magic. "She'll help guide your education about our history and traditions." Something in Lydia's expression shifted almost imperceptibly at those words. A flicker of something that might have been displeasure or concern. But it passed so quickly that Serena wondered if she had imagined it. The chambers Magnus assigned to her were larger than her entire cottage in Silverwood had been. Rich tapestries covered the stone walls, a fire crackled warmly in an enormous hearth, and windows looked out over breathtaking vistas of snow-capped mountains. It was luxury beyond her wildest dreams, but it also felt foreign and overwhelming. Rest tonight, Magnus said, standing in the doorway with an expression that was part concern, part something deeper. Tomorrow, your real education begins. That first night, Serena barely slept. The bed was too soft, the room too quiet, and her mind too full of questions and fears. What if she couldn't live up to the expectations of Magnus's vision? What if the Oracle bloodline had skipped her entirely, leaving her as ordinary and powerless as she had always believed herself to be? What if coming here had been the mistake of a desperate woman grasping at impossible dreams? Dawn broke grey and cold over the mountains, and with it came a soft knock at her door. The young woman who entered was perhaps Serena's age, with kind brown eyes and a gentle smile that immediately put her at ease. "Good morning, my lady. I'm Isabella, and I've been assigned to help you adjust to life in the keep." She carried a tray of steaming tea and fresh bread that smelled like heaven. "Supreme Alpha Magnus asked me to prepare you for your first lesson with Master Aldrich." Master Aldrich, Serena learned, was the keep's historian and the foremost expert on Oracle bloodlines in their realm. She found him in a tower library that took her breath away. Thousands of books and scrolls reached from floor to ceiling, and the air hummed with the power of ancient knowledge. The old man himself was small and wizened, with eyes that sparkled with intelligence and humor. "Ah, young Serena," he said without looking up from the massive tome he was studying. "Come, sit. We have much to discuss and little time to waste on pleasantries." For the next 3 hours, Aldrich spoke of bloodlines and prophecies, of powers that had once shaped the supernatural world, and the responsibilities that came with wielding them. Serena learned that oracles were not just fortune tellers, but bridges between realms, capable of seeing the threads that connected all living things and occasionally nudging those threads toward harmony. "Your great-grandmother was the last true oracle our people knew," Aldrich explained, his gnarled fingers tracing symbols in an ancient text. "She foresaw the great wars between pacts that nearly destroyed us 50 years ago, and her guidance helped Magnus's grandfather unite the northern territories under one banner. But her death left us blind to the supernatural currents that shape our world." "And you think I can replace her?" Serena asked, her voice small with doubt. Aldrich looked at her then, really looked, and she felt as if he could see straight through to her soul. "Child, you carry her blood, but more importantly, you carry her gift. It's been sleeping, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The question isn't whether you can replace her, it's whether you're brave enough to become who you're meant to be." The days that followed blurred together in a whirlwind of education and training. Mornings with Aldrich learning about oracle history and techniques, afternoons with Magnus learning about pack politics and leadership, evenings with Lydia studying the complex web of alliances and rivalries that governed their world. Every night, Serena collapsed into bed exhausted but oddly exhilarated, her mind buzzing with new knowledge and possibilities. But it was during the quiet moments with Magnus that she felt the most profound changes occurring within herself. They would walk the ancient paths around the keep as sunset painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, talking about everything and nothing. He told her stories of his childhood, of the burden and privilege of leadership, of the loneliness that came with being the one everyone looked to for answers. "I've been Supreme Alpha for 12 years, he said one evening as they paused beside a mountain stream that caught the last light of day. 12 years of making decisions that affect thousands of lives, 12 years of being the strong one, the reliable one, the one who never shows weakness or doubt." He looked at her then, and she saw vulnerability in those storm-grey eyes that took her breath away. "Until you arrived, I had forgotten what it felt like to have someone to share the burden with." Something shifted between them in that moment, something that went beyond the prophecy or the oracle bloodline or any grand destiny. It was simply two souls recognizing each other across the space that had always existed between them. Serena felt her heart, which she had thought broken beyond repair, begin to beat with new purpose. But their growing connection did not go unnoticed by others in the keep. "You're playing a dangerous game, Serena," Lydia said one afternoon, as they reviewed territorial maps in the counselor's private study. Her voice was carefully neutral, but there was steel beneath the silk. "Magnus is not just any man, he's the supreme alpha, responsible for the safety and prosperity of thousands. Personal attachments can compromise that judgment." "I'm not trying to compromise anything," Serena replied, though she could feel heat rising in her cheeks. "I'm here to learn about my bloodline and help however I can." "Are you?" Lydia's ice blue eyes seemed to pierce straight through her. "Because from where I sit, it looks like you're a lonely girl who's confused gratitude with love, and that confusion could destroy everything Magnus has built here." The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. Because beneath the cruelty, Serena heard the echo of her own deepest fears, that she was nothing special, that her feelings for Magnus were born from desperation rather than genuine connection, that she was still just the rejected Omega who wasn't worthy of an Alpha's attention. That night, doubt crept back into her heart like poison. As she lay in her luxurious bed staring at the ceiling, she began to question everything. Was Lydia right? Was she simply a broken woman, grasping at the first kindness shown to her? Had Magnus's vision been real? Or was she so desperate to believe in her own worth that she had imagined meaning where none existed? The crisis came during her 6th week at Thornfield Keep, during what should have been her first real attempt at oracle magic. Aldrich had prepared a scrying bowl filled with water from the sacred springs, surrounded by crystals that hummed with ancient power. The ritual required her to open herself completely, to let go of all defenses and allow her inner sight to emerge. "Close your eyes," Aldrich instructed, his voice gentle but firm. "Feel the water, feel the crystal song, feel the power that runs in your veins. Let it rise, child, let it flow through you." Serena tried. She closed her eyes and reached deep inside herself, searching for the spark of power that everyone insisted was there. She felt the warmth of the crystals, smelled the sweet fragrance of the sacred water, heard the subtle harmonies that seemed to emanate from the very air around them. But when she reached for her oracle gift, when she tried to grasp the power that was supposedly her birthright, she found nothing. Minutes passed in silence, then more minutes. Aldrich waited patiently, but Serena could feel his growing confusion. The crystals continued to hum, the water remained perfectly still, and she remained as ordinary and powerless as she had always been. "I can't," she whispered, opening her eyes to see disappointment flickering across the old man's face. "There's nothing there, no power, no gift, nothing." "Perhaps you're trying too hard," Aldrich suggested, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Oracle gifts sometimes require specific triggers, emotional catalysts." "No." Serena stood abruptly, knocking over one of the crystals in her haste. "You're all wrong. Magnus is wrong, the vision was wrong, everything is wrong. I'm not an oracle. I'm just a rejected Omega who's been living in a fantasy." She fled from the library, ignoring Aldrich's calls, and ran blindly through the keep's corridors until she found herself in the gardens. There, surrounded by the scent of late-blooming roses and the whisper of wind through ancient trees, she finally allowed herself to sob. This was where Magnus found her an hour later, curled up on a stone bench with her face buried in her hands. He didn't speak at first, just sat beside her and offered the solid comfort of his presence. When her tears finally subsided, he handed her a soft cloth and waited for her to compose herself. "Aldrich told me what happened," he said quietly. "Or rather, what didn't happen." "I'm sorry," Serena whispered without looking at him. "I know you had such hopes, such faith in me. But I'm not who you thought I was. I'm not who any of us thought I was." Magnus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than disappointed. "Do you know why I've never taken a mate, Serena? In all my 35 years, why I've never chosen someone to share my life and leadership? The question surprised her enough to make her look at him. "Because you haven't found the right person. Because I was waiting for someone who would choose me for who I am, not what I am," he said softly. "Someone who would see past the Supreme Alpha title to the man beneath. Someone who would love me even if I lost everything tomorrow. My power, my position, my pack." His hand found hers on the stone bench, warm and steady and real. "When I had that vision 25 years ago, do you know what I saw? Not an oracle performing great magic or commanding mystical powers. I saw a woman with auburn hair and green eyes who looked at me like I was worth loving, not because I was the Supreme Alpha, but because I was Magnus." Serena's breath caught in her throat. "But the prophecy, your grandmother's vision, were about you, yes, but not about magic, Serena, about love, about healing the rifts between our people, not through mystical power, but through the simple act of bringing wolves together who had forgotten how to trust each other." His thumb brushed across her knuckles, and she felt that familiar electric connection spark between them. "The power you need isn't oracle magic, it's the power to see the good in others, to inspire them to be better than they are, to heal wounds that run deeper than flesh." As if his words had broken some invisible barrier, Serena suddenly felt it. Not the mystical oracle power she had been straining to find, but something far more profound. She felt the threads that connected every living thing in the garden, felt the pain and hope and love that bound the people of the keep together, felt the deep wounds in Magnus's heart that leadership had carved there and the way her presence had begun to heal them. "I can feel it," she whispered, tears streaming down her face again, but these were tears of wonder, not despair. Not magic, but everything else. All the connections, all the emotions, all the ways we're all linked together. Magnus smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise over the mountains. "That's not oracle power, my love. That's something far rarer and far more precious. That's the gift of an empath, a healer of hearts and souls. The endearment, my love, hung in the air between them like a promise." Serena looked into his storm-grey eyes and saw her future reflected there. Not the grandiose destiny of an oracle, but something infinitely more valuable. A partnership built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and the shared goal of making their world a better place. But even as they moved closer together, even as Magnus's hand cupped her cheek and she felt the whisper of his breath against her lips, a shadow fell across their perfect moment. Lydia stood in the garden entrance, her beautiful face a mask of cold fury and something that looked almost like betrayal. "How touching," the High Counselor said, her voice dripping with icy disdain. "Though I wonder what your pack members will think when they learn their Supreme Alpha has chosen a powerless nobody over the good of his people." Magnus straightened, his body immediately shifting into the protective stance of an alpha defending his mate. But Lydia wasn't finished. "Did you really think no one would discover the truth, Magnus? That no one would investigate the convenient vision that brought this little nobody into our midst?" Her smile was sharp as a blade. "I've been in contact with certain members of the Silverwood Pack. It seems there are interesting details about why young Damien really rejected his supposed mate." Serena's blood turned to ice in her veins. Whatever Lydia knew, whatever she had discovered, the satisfaction in her voice promised that it would destroy everything that had just begun to bloom between her and Magnus. But what the High Counselor revealed next would shatter every assumption Serena had made about her past, her rejection, and the true reason destiny had brought her to the Northern Territories. Lydia's words hung in the garden air like a death sentence, and Serena felt the world tilt dangerously around her. Whatever the High Counselor had discovered about her rejection, the malicious triumph in those ice-blue eyes promised devastation beyond anything Serena had yet endured. "Speak plainly, Lydia," Magnus commanded, his voice carrying the full authority of his position. But Serena heard something else beneath the command, a thread of concern that made her stomach clench with dread. Oh, I think our little foundling deserves to hear this directly from the source. Don't you? Lydia smiled with predatory satisfaction as she stepped aside to reveal a figure emerging from the shadows behind her. Damien Silverwood stepped into the garden, and Serena's world shattered all over again. He looked exactly as she remembered, golden hair catching the fading light, powerful shoulders that spoke of alpha strength, blue eyes that had once promised her forever. But now those eyes held something she had never seen in them before, shame so profound it seemed to radiate from him like heat from a fever. "Serena," he said, and her name sounded broken on his lips. "I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry for what I did to you, for what I let them do to you." Magnus moved protectively in front of her, every line of his body tense with barely controlled aggression. "You have 60 seconds to explain yourself, Silverwood, before I remove you from my territory permanently." But Serena found her voice first, stepping around Magnus despite his protective stance. "What are you doing here, Damien? What does she mean about why you rejected me?" Her heart hammered against her ribs as terrible possibilities began to form in her mind. Damien's handsome face crumpled with guilt. The rejection. God, Serena. It wasn't real. "I didn't want to reject you, I was forced to." His voice broke on the admission. "They threatened you. They said if I didn't reject you publicly, they would make sure you didn't survive the humiliation of being an alpha's mate from such lowly origins." The words hit Serena like physical blows. Who threatened me?" "The Council of Alphas," Damien said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Led by my own father and backed by several other pack leaders who believed that allowing someone of your bloodline to mate with an alpha would set a dangerous precedent. They said it would encourage other undesirables to aim above their station." Serena felt the blood drain from her face as the full scope of the betrayal revealed itself. Not only had she been rejected, but the rejection had been orchestrated by those who considered her very existence a threat to their precious hierarchy. "But there's more," Lydia interjected, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Tell her about the orders they gave you afterwards, Damien. Tell her about what you were supposed to do once she was broken and desperate." Damien flinched, as if he'd been struck. "They wanted me to approach you after a few weeks when you were at your lowest point, to offer you comfort and a chance to be my mistress, never my mate, of course, but someone I could visit in secret." His voice grew thick with self-loathing. "They said a woman of your status should be grateful for even that much attention from an alpha." The garden spun around Serena as she processed this final degradation. Not only had they orchestrated her public humiliation, but they had planned to use her desperation to reduce her to nothing more than a dirty secret, a shameful indulgence hidden away from respectable society. "And did you?" Magnus asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Did you plan to take advantage of her pain in that way?" "No," Damien said quickly, then his shoulders sagged. At first I considered it. God forgive me, I actually thought maybe it would be better than nothing. That maybe if I could just explain." He looked directly at Serena, tears streaming down his face. "But then I realized what a monster that would make me. So I stayed away. I let you think the worst of me, rather than make everything even worse by trying to justify what I'd done." Serena stared at him, this man she had once believed she loved, and felt nothing. No anger, no renewed heartbreak, no forgiveness. Just a hollow acknowledgement of how completely her old life had been built on lies and manipulation. "Why are you here now?" she asked, her voice strangely calm. "Why tell me this?" "Because word spread about Magnus taking you to the Northern Territories," Damien said. "The same council that forced me to reject you is now terrified that you've found real power, real protection. They've been pressuring me to come here and bring you back, to convince you that your place is in Silverwood, as my mistress after all." Lydia stepped forward. her beautiful face alight with malicious pleasure. "And that, my dear Supreme Alpha, is why your precious oracle is nothing but a pawn in a larger political game. She's not here because of some divine vision. She's here because she's a weapon that various factions want to control." Magnus's growl was so low and dangerous that every wolf instinct Serena possessed screamed at her to submit or flee. But instead of intimidation, she felt something else rising within her, a fury so pure and righteous that it seemed to burn away all the doubt and self-hatred that had plagued her for months. "You're right, Lydia," Serena said, her voice carrying a strength that surprised everyone, including herself. "I am a weapon, but not the kind any of you think." She stepped away from both Magnus and Damien, moving to the center of the garden where moonlight was beginning to filter through the ancient trees. "For months, I believed I was worthless because a man rejected me. For weeks, I believed I was special because another man chose me. But you know what I just realized? My worth was never determined by any of you." The air around her began to shimmer, not with oracle magic, but with something far more potent, the power of a woman who had finally, fully embraced who she truly was. "You want to know what I can do?" Serena continued, and now her voice carried across the garden like a bell. "I can see the threads that connect every living thing, feel the pain and hope and love that bind us together. I can feel Damien's genuine remorse for the cowardice that cost us both so much. I can feel Lydia's terror that her position as Magnus's closest advisor is threatened by a woman who actually loves him instead of just using him." Lydia's face went pale as Arctic ice. "You know nothing about my relationship with Magnus." "I know everything," Serena replied calmly. "I can feel how you've loved him for years, how you convinced yourself that your political maneuvering was really about protecting him. I can feel how you've sabotaged every potential romantic connection he might have made, telling yourself it was for the good of the pack." The High Counselor's composure cracked completely. "You have no right." "I have every right," Serena interrupted, and now her voice carried the authority of someone who had finally stepped fully into their power. "Because unlike you, I love Magnus enough to want his happiness more than I want to possess him. If he chose you tomorrow, it would break my heart, but I would step aside because his well-being matters more to me than my own desires." She turned to Magnus, who was staring at her with an expression of wonder and growing pride. "And that's how I know what we have is real. Not because of some vision or prophecy, but because when I look at you, I see not the Supreme Alpha, but the man who walks alone in his gardens at night, carrying the weight of thousands of lives on his shoulders. I see the man who doubts himself, but never lets anyone else know it. I see the man who has been so lonely for so long that he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen by another person." Magnus stepped toward her, his storm-grey eyes blazing with emotions too complex to name. "Serena, I'm not finished," she said softly, then turned back to face Damien and Lydia. "You both came here thinking you could manipulate me, control me, use me for your own purposes. But here's what you failed to understand. I'm not the broken girl who was rejected at a ceremony 2 months ago. That girl is gone, transformed not by magic or prophecy, but by the simple act of choosing to believe she deserved better. The power radiating from her now was unmistakable, not supernatural ability, but the profound strength of a woman who had found her true self. Wolves throughout the keep were beginning to gather at the garden's edges, drawn by something they couldn't name, but couldn't resist. "Damien," Serena said, her voice gentle but implacable, "go back to Silverwood. Tell your father and his council of alphas that their threats have no power here. Tell them that I am exactly where I choose to be, with exactly who I choose to be with. And tell them that if they ever threaten someone else the way they threatened me, they'll answer to the Northern Territories." Damien nodded, his face a mixture of relief and lingering shame. "I will. And Serena, I know I have no right to ask, but can you ever forgive me?" Serena studied him for a long moment, feeling the genuine remorse that radiated from him like warmth from a fire. "I forgive you, Damien. Not because what you did was acceptable, but because carrying anger toward you would only poison my own happiness." She paused, then added softly, "I hope someday you find the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult." As Damien departed, his shoulders straighter than they'd been since his arrival, Serena turned her attention to Lydia. The High Counselor stood rigid with fury and humiliation, her beautiful features twisted with emotions she could no longer control. "And you, Lydia," Serena said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "You have a choice to make. You can continue trying to sabotage what Magnus and I have, in which case you'll find yourself exiled from the only home you've known for 15 years. Or you can accept that your value to this pack was never romantic and that being Magnus's trusted advisor is an honor worthy of respect." "You think you can just waltz in here and take my place?" Lydia spat. "I've served this pack faithfully for 15 years, Serena finished. 15 years of excellent service that I have no intention of undermining. I'm not here to replace you as High Counselor, Lydia. I'm here to stand beside Magnus as his partner, his mate, his equal. There's room for both of us in his life, but only if you can accept that romantic love and loyal friendship are different things." The tension stretched between them like a wire about to snap. Then, slowly, Lydia's rigid posture began to soften. Through her empathic gifts, Serena could feel the internal battle raging within the other woman, years of suppressed longing warring with genuine loyalty to the pack she had served so faithfully. "You really mean it," Lydia said finally, her voice small with wonder. "You're not here to destroy what I've built." "I'm here to build something new," Serena replied. "Something that includes everyone who truly wants what's best for these people." Magnus stepped forward then, his presence commanding but gentle. "Lydia, you are one of the finest advisors I've ever known. Your political insights have saved countless lives and prevented numerous conflicts. I need that expertise now more than ever." He looked between the two women, his expression serious. "But I also need you to understand that Serena is going to be my mate, my partner in all things. Can you accept that?" For a moment that stretched like eternity, Lydia remained silent. Then, slowly, she bowed her head in acceptance. "Yes, Supreme Alpha, I can accept that." She looked up at Serena with eyes that held respect rather than hostility. "And perhaps it's time I stopped defining my worth by what I couldn't have and started appreciating what I do have." The moment felt like a victory, but Serena sensed it was only the beginning. Through her expanding empathic abilities, she could feel the complex web of relationships and politics that governed the Northern Territories. There would be other challenges, other threats to face. But for the first time since this journey began, she felt ready to face them. Magnus moved to her side, his hand finding hers with the natural ease of two souls that had finally found their match. "So, Serena Blackwood," he said, his voice warm with affection and pride, "are you ready to become the Luna of the Northern Territories? Because I should probably mention that the position comes with significant responsibilities and absolutely no guarantee of a peaceful life." Serena laughed, the sound pure and joyful in the moonlit garden. "Magnus Thornfield, I've been publicly rejected, emotionally manipulated, threatened by political conspiracies, and challenged by jealous advisors. After all that, running a territory full of supernatural politics sounds almost relaxing." He grinned, that rare, transformative smile that made him look years younger. "In that case, there's something I need to ask you properly." To her amazement, this powerful alpha, this man who commanded the respect and loyalty of thousands, dropped to one knee in front of her. "Serena Blackwood," he said, his voice carrying across the garden to where pack members had gathered to witness this moment. Will you bond with me, not because of prophecy or political necessity, but because you choose to? Will you be my mate, my Luna, my partner in all the adventures and challenges to come? Looking down at him, Serena felt the last pieces of her old, broken self finally fall away completely. In their place rose someone new, not the rejected Omega or the supposed Oracle, but simply a woman who had learned to value herself enough to demand the love she deserved. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong enough to reach every corner of the garden. "I choose you, Magnus. Not because destiny brought us together, but because you saw something in me worth believing in when I couldn't see it in myself." As he rose and took her in his arms, as their lips met in a kiss that tasted like promises and new beginnings, the wolves of the Northern Territories raised their voices in a howl of celebration that echoed off the mountains and up to the stars themselves. The girl who had once stood broken and humiliated in a moonlit ceremony was gone forever. In her place stood Luna Serena Thornfield, beloved mate of the Supreme Alpha, protector of the vulnerable, and bridge builder between hearts that had forgotten how to trust. But as the celebration continued around them, as pack members approached to offer congratulations and pledges of loyalty, Serena felt something else through her empathic gifts, distant but growing stronger. Somewhere in the realm beyond the Northern Territories, forces were stirring that would test everything she and Magnus had built together. Their love story was complete, but their greatest adventures were just beginning. And this time, whatever challenges came their way, they would face them together, not as broken individuals seeking completion in another person, but as two whole souls choosing to build something beautiful side by side. The moon goddess's prophecy had been fulfilled, but not in the way anyone had expected. Sometimes the greatest magic wasn't supernatural power or ancient bloodlines. Sometimes it was simply the courage to choose love over fear, growth over stagnation, and hope over despair. As Serena looked up at the star-filled sky above the Northern Territories, her hand secure in Magnus's warm grasp, she silently thanked whatever force had brought her to this moment. The path had been painful, the lessons hard-won, but every step had been necessary to bring her to exactly where she belonged. In the distance, a wolf howled, not with celebration this time, but with something else entirely. A warning, perhaps, or a promise of challenges yet to come. But Serena felt no fear as she listened to that haunting sound. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would meet it with the strength she had discovered within herself and the love of the man who had helped her find it. The second chance of destiny had given her everything she had never dared to dream of, and she intended to make the most of every moment of it.